The Syrian rebels have reached the strategic city of Homs and are at the outskirts. There are even rumors that they are currently even entering the city already. This is the last connection of Latakia, where the Alawites are, and Damascus, where Assad has his government. This is happening while further south of Damascus, a new uprising has started and has already taken over dozens of towns. So a new front is building that is going to push northwards to fall into the back of the Syrian forces that are currently contracting from all parts of the front line and are giving up possessions, especially in the east, but also in the south. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened in Syria at the front lines and behind them in this situation report. We'll start off in the north here at Manbij. Here the fighting is continuing. I do not see any proof of a success by the SDF at Al-Hafsa here, that supposedly the SDF were in the process of connecting it. There were even claims that they had encircled SNA forces. There's no proof of it. There's reports that the SNA is sending additional reinforcements, including heavy weapons, tanks, etc., and that the fighting here in the north is also continuing. But so far, I cannot confirm any change, any significant event over this. So far, the front line seems to be stable. Further to the west, in the Idlib Latakia area, we have reports about fighting in the north where rebel troops try to advance into the south. And just a reminder here, rebel is just somebody who is doing a rebellion. That doesn't mean he can't be an Islamist, a terrorist, a monarchist, a Democrat, or a flat earth believer, for all we care. This is a generalization that is neutral that I'm going to use here. The different groups, I'm going to use the acronyms again. I've already made it explained the different meanings of those in the first video of this series. But we go back to the area here. We have reports that in Idlib, Latakia, the fighting is also continuing in the north of Latakia, but again, no proof of an advance by the rebel forces there. We do have reports, though, that there was an attempt to strike the Maimin airfield where the Russians have their air force with drones. Supposedly it failed, but the pro-Russian Milblogger fighter bomber said that the situation there is very problematic because this is not a built-up airfield with solid structures. If the rebels come closer, then everything there is in dire danger. He's already painting the picture that the Russians might have to give up a lot of equipment just to get out of there really soon. At the same time, there was an attack reported on a bridge in the south of the region here. The bridge directly connecting Latakia to Lebanon was bombed, and as we can clearly see, it was destroyed here. The reason for that is unclear who did it as well, but it's likely that it was Israel, because for the Syrians or the Russians to do it as of now would make no sense. While the reasoning isn't clear, it seems to me that this would be, the aim there would be to probably not allow Syrian forces to bring heavy weapons to Hezbollah. That might be some reason, but as said, as of now, it's still unclear. But the bridge here is, as you can see, basically taken out. I guess pedestrians might still be able to cross it, but that's it at the point here in the south where the bombing has happened. The main fighting is obviously happening in the area of Homs. This is the strategic front of the war. Now, north of it, we have reports from the central prison in Hama, where the rebels have freed prisoners that were up there for over 40 years, among them several Lebanese citizens that have disappeared over 40 years ago in the uprising in Hama that happened in 82, where Hafez al-Assad, the father of the current president and dictator of Syria, had a massacre being conducted against the Muslim Brotherhood that did an uprising there. And since then, prisoners were in that prison in Hama, and now they were released, among them people having disappeared 40 years ago. According to the Syrian defense minister, the retreat from Hama happened to save civilians from harm, and soon the rebels will be defeated. How much we want to take this serious is obviously a different story. The rebels in the area have taken over a number of towns after negotiations. Among them was, for instance, here we have reports that Salamia was negotiating with rebels. This is one of the towns there, that the Christian town of Salamia was, for instance, negotiated. The rebels under Hayat Tahrir al-Sham were talking to the local residents, negotiating with them, and thus allowing them to take over the Christian town without bloodshed there. And so far, no transgressions were reported. The rebels have been reported in further towns in the south. We have videos here, for instance, where we see rebels driving here, and this is very easy to recognize. This road here, this is right in the center of the town of Rastan. This is south of the Orontes River. So at the point here, the rebels had already reached this, and this is Hama that has just fallen yesterday. The rebels were also in the town of Talib Sech. We also have a video here of them driving around a central circle. This is the circle that is down here. And again, further south of the previous advances, Talisech is here, even closer to Homs once again. Then the Russians are continuing air attacks on, as we can see here, on the bridge at Al-Rastan. This is the bridge here crossing the Orontes, and still they have not been able to collapse it to prevent the rebels from spreading out further south. And so far this has not been successful. And an impressive video was published yesterday. This is showing the situation in Homs. And those are people fleeing from the advance of the rebels. You can see here the lights. I tried to geolocate it, and I think it is this place looking towards the east. This arrow here, this here should be that road crossing in here. I guess it should be, because this would be the road upwards in the direction of the rebels, and it makes sense that we don't see many lights here. And if we look closely, it looks like people have already started using the opposite lane to drive southwards as well, to drive away from the front line, meaning that there's clear panic that uses all the available roads here. We have industrial areas in the background that would explain the chimney here. So I think I'm 80% certain that this picture was taken here. And the road, as you can see, is leading from Homs to Tartus in the west. And this is important because if we look on the map, this is one big road, and there is a small one here along the border of Lebanon, and that's it. Those are the only two connections that are still available to the Syrian government and its affiliates that are safe to get to Latakia and back to the rest of the government-held areas. Now, according to the map, this might still be available, but as you can see, this is probably too risky for anyone to use at this point, with the rebels already being on the ring road here as well. So the Russians, the Syrian population is fleeing here in droves towards Latakia, away from Homs, ahead of the advance of the rebels. This is leading to further developments also. We have it here, Russian helicopters. We see first a Kamov 52 flying, and then a Mi-8 transport helicopters. According to reports, as you can see, geolocation is pretty difficult here, but according to reports, those were Russian helicopters fleeing from Homs towards Damascus, and as you can see, he was dispersing flares, obviously feeling somewhat under threat of infrared guided missiles, of manpads at the same time. According to this, the Russians would withdraw their aerial means from the area to vacate it, as they expect Homs to fall pretty soon. This isn't all. In the east, it's continuing as well. The SDF have taken Al-Rasafa and Madan. This is down here. This is an area that was previously held by the government. As you can remember, in the last situation report, we had the SDF mostly on the eastern bank of the Euphrates. This has now changed significantly. They have advanced at various points because the SAA is withdrawing. This has also been shown here, where we see the SDF at the airport of Deir ez-Zor. Here we have a huge column of them at Deir ez-Zor. This is because this has happened before. Withdrawal of the government forces. You can see various IFVs, motorcycles. These are the forces withdrawing here. All of them, they are consolidating everything they have in the area of Damascus. They're pulling everything towards the west. This means that the support for the central areas in military means is increasing, but for that Assad has to give up vast areas, including areas with oil fields, that thus will no longer be able to help him with his revenue. This is happening at the same time while there are claims that the Islamic State has taken over several towns. They still had fighters in the area, mostly dispersed in the desert areas, but with the withdrawal of the Syrian Arab Army, there are claims that they have retaken some of the towns. Also, we have the claim here that according to Reuters, the Syrians have crossed, the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, mostly made up from Kurds. They have crossed the Euphrates here and cut off and taken the border crossing at Al-Qaim. This means that the last land connection to Iraq and thus to Iran is cut, because there are only two good viable roads that were still in the south area here, and that's this one here, and this is controlled by rebels and the United States, and this one here was controlled by the government. Now the SDF has taken it over and thus cut any ground lines of communication towards Iraq that is not granted by the SDF at this point. There are also reports that the rebels from the southern area here of Al-Tarif, which is, as said, basically a protectorate of the United States, including a refugee camp that is protected by the US and those rebels, that the rebels from here have started to advance northwards and are approaching Palmyra. Fighting is getting closer to it. This would obviously cut off the country even further and basically half the country and cut any connection from the east of the country towards the west for the government. So it means that the government by now would be basically focused on this area here at most and have no more ability even to operate in the east, having lost all the control of the area here. But while that isn't bad enough for Assad, the situation in the south is even worse. As you might have remembered in last video, there was nothing here. This was all under government control. Now we have reports, in Daraa, the district capital of the Daraa Governorate, the rebels have taken over. This is here in the center of Daraa. They also have taken Nasib. This is here visible. Is the border crossing. This is the border crossing to Jordan. So another means of support of commerce, even if the front lines stabilize at some point. Assad will need border crossings to finance his government, to finance his military. Now they've lost the border crossing in the south as well. And we have reports that the rebels in Daraa and in Suwaida have taken government equipment as well. As we can see, tanks and IFVs are in the hands of rebels here as well. So the south is all heating up right now. They are taking up arms and using the clear weakness of the government to reconquer the territory. Some of it was held by rebels before, and they are spreading out there. There is fighting happening, so the SAA is not withdrawing without firing back, but as of now they're being pushed back at various areas, and as you can see, it's spreading more and more. If you look at the Syria map in probably 5 hours, you probably see even more regions, because it's basically every hour a few more towns are being reported as fighting having started, as ultimatums being given to local administrations to hand over the control to rebels, etc. The south is aflame as well, and Assad is losing his control over this area by the hour there as well. International support is still being debated. We have Al-Jolani, the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, he asked the Iraqi government to stay out and to stop the PMF from an intervention, to leave it to the Syrians to decide their fate. Hezbollah said that they want to keep the peace, the ceasefire with Israel, and they are standing beside Assad. I have not seen any proof, any credible claims of reinforcement being sent to Assad, though, even though they would have to do it fairly soon, and it would be in their strategic interest to keep Assad in power. There are reports that Iran is sending aid. They are sending, according to reports, they're sending missiles, they are sending advisors and drones, but there's no talk about actual ground troops that would enter the fight. We have reports from the New Arab that Assad asked Iraq for military aid, but it's undecided, and the claims are they still don't want it. And the influential Muqtada al-Sadr has said that Iraq should not help Assad and that it should be a domestic issue. This is important too, because Muqtada al-Sadr is a Shiite and a very influential one in Iraq. He's well known to the American audience of having his militia fight the US troops in Iraq for a long time. He was long considered to be in the Iranian pocket, and still now he shows his emancipation from the Iranian influence, because it would clearly be inside of Iran's interest to keep Assad in power. But Muqtada al-Sadr says we shouldn't help them, we shouldn't help Assad. This is a domestic Syrian interest, a domestic Syrian affair. If we look at the overall situation, the mass flight of civilians out of the Homs area towards the west shows that the people inside of Assad's areas have lost faith in his military to keep up the front lines, to hold the rebels back. We have videos of elation, of happiness of civilians where the rebels arrive. This might be a short-term thing. We've talked about it in the past already, that HTS is coming from Al-Qaeda, and while they have shown reforms, they still are not far away from a laicist, secular, democratic organization or anything like this. And even their, in quotation mark, tolerance still aims at the subjugation of other religions. From everything I read so far, for instance, churches not being allowed to ring their bells, having to remove the crosses and things like this. They are still morality police in the areas they control. At least that's what's being reported from Idlib. So while we are not having the whitest knights marching towards Assad, a lot of the civilians are still praising them and are happy that they have come. And civilians have already started to return in the areas. We have to know that Idlib was filled with internally displaced persons that fled from Assad or that were evacuated in front of him. And now they can return back to their homes after years of exile in Idlib, and obviously leading to a lot of happiness on their side. Rebels are also working actively to gain to have people switch sides. Not only do we have the talks that we had, for instance, with the Christian town there, we also have them stop now and then and ask Assad fighters to switch sides towards them. And there are public examples where it has been successful to a certain degree, not just from Aleppo, but further south as well. And as after that initial video of an execution of Assad soldiers, there have not been any further ones. This might be increasingly successful, especially as the Syrian Arab army proves to be unwilling, mostly unwilling to fight. What we see right now is that the regime is consolidating its positions. They increasingly focus on the axis Homs, Damascus, basically this area here, where they probably hope that they can keep up the connection to Latakia. This is a mountainous area here, so the flat area along the coast, this would probably be what they hope to keep under control, but this will still cause massive problems to Assad. Without Aleppo, he lost the economic heart. If he loses the connection at Homs, then he'll lose the connection to Latakia, which means that his power base will be lost. His troops, as I said a couple of times, are in danger of deserting to protect their home. And he will obviously lose access to the potential personnel sources in Latakia, as he'll have a hard time recruiting them if he doesn't even have a direct connection to them. Without foreign intervention, it seems like Assad is mostly gone. The question whether he'll be able to hold out or not is increasingly being decided without his participation, with the rapid advances of the rebels. As said, like, he might still find a way to stop it, but his situation has diminished to a massive degree that it seems that only a big foreign intervention would save him, would be able to save him. According to reports, Assad is in Tehran right now, probably to negotiate for especially this, but now we have the SDF cutting the lines of supply, the ground lines of communication towards the east. So if the Iranians were to send personnel, they would either have to negotiate with the SDF, they would have to fight themselves through, meaning to turn them into enemies and thus endangering their whole lines of communication as they have to advance along here. So basically hundreds of kilometers they would have to advance next to SDF held territory. So that this only leaves basically a negotiation with the SDF or flying them into Damascus airport, as any land connection is now cut, and any Iraqi or Iranian troops that are supposed to help cannot help anymore. So this means that an intervention becomes increasingly unlikely with every hour. And we also have to see that an intervention just to stop the rebels is not a solution either. Assad has lost so much territory, so much of his potential to continue waging war, that he has to be kept in power, especially as his armed forces have proven that they are incapable and unwilling to continue fighting. So he has to have not just an air campaign to help his forces on the ground. He needs foreign troops, and those foreign troops have to stay in place to keep him in power. This would obviously mean immense investment of resources, immense costs that would have to be paid, and whether Russia is basically out of the picture. They can send some planes at best, but whether Iran is willing to take those costs is increasingly questionable, even though Assad is important for their strategic goal. So any short-term solution will not help at all. If Iran wants to save Assad, they need to send troops. They need to send a lot of troops, and they need to leave them inside of Syria for the coming years, and that is might be over Iran's capabilities. But if Assad falls, then Russia and Iran are facing a strategic defeat. Russia is showing that they are incapable of protecting their allies. This will have international consequences with their allies too, doubting their abilities. This also means that Tartus and Hmyimim, the airfield and the naval base, will be lost, that Russia is able to negotiate with the rebels that they can keep using them after they have bombed the hospitals that in rebel-held territory for 10 years is fairly unlikely. So Russia would lose Syria as a base, which would be a disaster for them, but the bigger disaster would be for Iran, as they would lose the land connection to Hezbollah, which is essential to be able to smuggle weapons to Hezbollah and to keep it in a strong fighting shape, and to allow it to recover from the fight against Israel. So without Assad, Hezbollah will never find back to its old strength, or very, very hard. And the chances that Assad has are getting smaller by the hour. He still probably has chances. By some luck, by some measures, he might be able to still stabilize the front line. We have to see that the rebel forces aren't that crazy numerous. The estimations are that HTS has probably 40,000 fighters. If Assad can find enough militias to stop them and halt the advance, and thus reinsert confidence towards his own forces, that they see, okay, so maybe we can stop them after all, then the front lines might stabilize, but it wouldn't be a long-term solution, because the threat here is so big, and the losses in economic power, in oil fields, in industry, in power plants that he suffered so far will cripple his government. So we'll have to see how it continues, but it seems fairly justified to start betting on whether or not Bashar al-Assad is still the president of Syria at the end of this year. Others react to that. China and Russia have asked their civilians, the people of their nationality, to leave Syria immediately. There's even claims that Israel is preparing to enter the Syrian government, the Syrian state itself, to create a buffer zone. Well-known channels spread this with claims, unfortunately unsourced. So I have to say it's still rumors in my mind, but this would mean that according to those claims, the Israelis would get ready to take over additional Syrian territory to create a buffer zone in case of an Islamist takeover of the country, to have additional ground to save their own territory from attacks by the Islamists in the future. And there are claims that the Russians are already withdrawing their ships after the drone attack on Hama. This would mean that this time for real the Russian ships were withdrawing. I have not seen proof of this either. And there was claim that the Syrian Arab army has ordered a withdrawal from Homs. There are videos of ships, of tank carriers that are driving in Homs, but I wasn't able to see whether they are driving southwards and thus away from the front line, or whether they might deploy and bring tanks towards the front line. As of now, at least, I do not see a proof that Homs is already giving up, and to give it up at this point would be suicide. I do not see how the Syrian government has a serious chance of survival with this regard, with it not even fighting for Homs. This is also meaning in foreign intervention terms. It's one thing to intervene on the side of somebody that is fighting his best, and it's another thing, a completely different thing, to intervene on a nation that is basically already giving up, where the soldiers don't want to fight, because then you know that your own forces will have to do all the fighting, because the locals don't even want to fight anymore. And it increasingly looks like this. So I'm unfortunately, I can't say much more. We'll have to see over the next few days how it develops there. But as said, the rumors right now are that Assad, another rumor is that Assad has already fled. I did not see any proof of this, that his travel to Tehran would be would already be him fleeing the country. But the rumors now are Israel preparing to invade, to create a buffer zone, Russians already fleeing and withdrawing their ships, and Homs being evacuated, being given up by the Syrian Arab army. So far, I do not see any proof of either of the three. But that was it from me for today. If you like the situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment when you have something to add here. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.